Did you go down the meetings? Is this the kind of thing that you would like to see more of?
Excuse me.
Rochester, there are ones.
Yeah. There's been a few of these for that,
Yeah, this is the third one.
Okay.
Whereas wow, and this is the third one on LEED. There'll be another three in the ocean as well.
Oh, very good.
We'll kind of come up with a third.
And they're all focused on
They're all sustainable. Yeah.
Who put this there?
Huh?
Who put that there? That was just there.
I suspect Eloise did.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yeah, I didn't. Sorry, I actually.
I thought maybe it was a secret admirer.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome on this lovely sunny day. It is summer, finally. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Joanna Gill. I'm the current president of SASI. It's lovely to see so many of you here this afternoon. This is our third and final CPD in the spring series, I think we called it. Extended spring series. And it's very timely because yesterday the government launched the Climate Action Plan to tackle climate breakdown. That's a really important milestone. Eloise is only halfway through the document yet, so we haven't quite got a summary for you, but we're looking forward to getting that. Anyway, today we're here to talk about LEED, and our speaker is Nellie Reid. Nellie's going to cover the various aspects of LEED, synergies with WELL, GRESB and NZEB, and in the context of the bigger picture. A little bit about Nellie. Nellie is Managing Director at Meehan Green, a sustainability consulting practice based in Dublin and Galway. Meehan Green is the first and only LEED proven provider based in Ireland, and Nellie herself was one of the world's first LEED accredited professionals in 2001. The first year accreditation was available. In 2011 she was honoured in the inaugural class of LEED Fellows and moved from California to Ireland. Nellie served on the board of the Living Building Institute in Ireland and the Tipperary Green Business Network. In addition to her role as a LEED consultant on over 50 commercial buildings in Ireland, she is also a WELL accredited professional. Some of you may have been at the WELL CPD we did a month or so ago, or a couple of months ago. And she's also a guest lecturer in UCD and TUD. So I'm going to hand you over to Nellie. I will mention briefly at the end of the, at some stage next week, we're going to be issuing you with a very, very short questionnaire, like 4 questions. Please do fill it out. It's a little bit of feedback on today, on the other CPD we've done, what CPDs you'd like to see coming down the track. So we're really keen to get feedback from you guys as to what you want us to deliver. And if anybody would like to put their hand up to deliver a CPD, we'd love you even more for that. So please do get in touch. So, Nellie.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, Eloise. Thank you all for having me here today. And thanks for coming inside when it's so gorgeous outside. I know you'd all rather be having lunch in the park right now, but I appreciate your time today. So I actually, in hearing the news yesterday, almost completely changed my presentation at the last minute, but similar to Eloise, I didn't have time to read the whole thing in the last 24 hours. But, you know, it is really relevant in our conversation today that policies are changing, regulations are changing, and so in alignment with LEED and other green building rating systems that are voluntary, there's also regulatory changes that are happening that are mandatory. So even though LEED may seem like a nice to have and a market-driven kind of voluntary rating system, the entire country is going in this direction. So the sooner we get familiar with the the strategies and the process, the easier it is to implement them when they become regulation, which is imminent. So, again, if regulations are always getting more stringent, we always need something that makes, that's a market differentiator. So developers in Ireland, if they're pursuing a LEED Gold or Platinum rating, the reason they pursue it is because it differentiates them from people who are just complying with the code. So just to be clear, NZEB sounds like a fancy word, but it's really just a name for the new Part L, which is building regulation. So it's the law. NZEB is not an option, it's just the new Part L, building regulation. So whereas LEED is a voluntary rating system that's not connected to any government regulations, it's international. So I'm going to talk about some stats about how LEED is kind of building in the market in Europe and Ireland, and also synergies with some of the other schemes you've already heard presentations on, like WELL and GRESB. And then where do we go from here? After hearing all these presentations, what do you bring back to your office after this? So like I was saying, if you look at this chart here, it's the evolution of kind of the green building and voluntary certifications versus regulations. So as the regulations become greener, so as Part L becomes more stringent, as the EU directives become more stringent and our goals become more aggressive, the market shifts so that those become just kind of mandatory. And so the market shift in LEED and WELL and GRESB is to be on the front end of that, ahead of the regulations. And then there's very few people who are the people who make the bold move to be kind of the first one to adopt something. So in the last year we saw both the first and second WELL certified projects in Ireland, and that was by iPut and Arup. So, they decided to kind of be on that bleeding edge. And so what's kind of the next bleeding edge there? And just to kind of take it back to what's going on here in Ireland, they're all over the news. There are things going on with nature that we don't realize maybe here in Dublin when you're going about your daily commute and your routine about what's going on to the habitats in green fields in Ireland, and the fact that we're losing a lot of our diversity in plant species and also habitats for animals. And bees are a big issue. You've probably seen in the news in the last few years, a lot of people, like LinkedIn even has their beekeeping on their roof. I think AIB is. Coworkers of mine have plots in community gardens where they're doing beekeeping, and you may think, what is the connection of bees to green building? But it's all about restoring the habitat and being smart about how we're building buildings so that we can maintain habitat in other places. We can also look at creating habitat on roofs of buildings. So like on LinkedIn, it's on the roof of the building, and they're creating habitat there. Another example is Oracle at East Point. They have green roofs on their buildings, and they're actually producing enough honey now that they're selling the honey in their canteen. There we go. Another completely different thing that's going on in the environment is, in addition to the habitat and the extinction of species and the reduction in bees and pollen and reproduction of plants, we also have this issue with global warming. And if you look at refrigerant use in buildings, it's the single most important way that we can reduce global warming. So you may be thinking, oh, reduction of global warming is, wind turbines or solar panels or reducing fossil fuel use. Well, it's also the refrigerants we use in our air conditioning equipment. So companies like Mitsubishi, for example, have a hybrid VRF system that uses water instead of refrigerant. Or R32 is has a lower global warming potential than other refrigerants. So there's so many different aspects of green building, from habitat restoration to what kind of air conditioning equipment you specify. And so LEED looks at all of these in a big picture. And then another big issue is climate change. And to bring it back to what's going on locally, just in Dublin City, there's 20,000 buildings that are at risk from flooding. And there's others that are potential risks. And a few years ago, there were large floods and basements were flooded. So even thinking about where we put emergency generators and, what services are under buildings. LEED also addresses designing for resilient design so that you're accounting for the fact of where are these floodplains, and even the 100-year floodplain boundary is changing. So Ireland's in the midst of redrawing the floodplain boundaries, so that basically all the buildings along the Keys or the River Liffey are in the floodplain. So, and they were all built at a certain level, but any new buildings that are being built higher, so that they don't have as much flood risk. And also that other picture is Cork, which is another story altogether. They've got severe flooding problems down there, so if any of you are working in Cork, they've got some major infrastructure changes in figuring out how to control the flood levels down there. So acronyms. Eloise was telling me how people hate when you have acronyms without explanation of what they are, so this will all be in the material that's passed along, but it is an acronym-rich environment that we live in, especially in the building and construction industry. So just to kind of give you a snapshot of kind of where I'm getting to today, BREEAM. Have any of you worked on BREEAM projects? Just to raise a hands if you've worked on BREEAM. Okay. So BREEAM, before the recession, BREEAM was kind of the big thing in the Celtic Tiger. Everybody was BREEAM excellent, BREEAM outstanding. That was kind of the green building rating system in Ireland, and it actually started in 1990, so it's been around a long time. The big difference is just right after BRE created the BREEAM rating system, the U.S. Green Building Council came up with their own version, and initially it was meant to be a U.S. standard. So it's all based on ASHRAE and American standards. But the U.S. Green Building Council, they created the LEED rating system. And as soon as the LEED rating system was adopted, it went international. And it went beyond their original expectations. So they very quickly adapted LEED to become an international universal green building standard, whereas BREEAM is more country specific. So if you're doing BREEAM in Ireland, it's not the same as doing BREEAM in the Netherlands. So they have different baselines based on what country you're in, whereas with LEED, it's the same baseline all over the world. So it's the first international standard that really multinational companies could use to kind of measure their buildings against each other. The Green Business Certification Institute was created to be the kind of third-party certification body to review LEED ratings. And this is part of like an ISO standard where if you want to have a credible certification system, you have to have a third party reviewing it. Whereas BRE, BREEAM, your BREEAM assessor is on your team and is kind of reviewing it as you go along. Whereas with LEED, you have an independent reviewer that you will never meet, you won't know their name, and they're reviewing it. And they're reviewing it based on documentation alone. So the documentation has to be quite robust in order for someone, sitting in their living room in Minnesota who's a LEED reviewer, kind of reviewing your building, having never been to Dublin, never seen the building. So it's really important the way we communicate our design in LEED reviews, even more so than BREEAM, because BREEAM, you could just kind of have the BREEAM assessor in the room and say, yeah, you get it, right, we're doing this, and the BREEAM assessor kind of nods their head, and you're paying them, so of course they're going to say yes. Whereas with LEED, the LEED reviewer is purely independent. In 2011, the same year I moved to Ireland, the Irish Green Building Council formed. That's just coincidental. Had nothing to do with it. But it is interesting because after the recession and in that period, 2011, 2012, is when, because there was a pause, we kind of regrouped and said, okay, what's going on here in Ireland? And that's when LEED kind of took over the market here. And then a few years later, WELL was launched. It took a few years for WELL to kind of make its way into the Irish market, but it was launched in 2014, so it is already 5 years old, and it's only this year that we're seeing the first WELL certified projects. I should mention that both WELL and LEED are both managed by the Green Building Certification Institute. So there is a connection between the two rating systems, so that's why we kind of talk about them together, and I'll go through them a little bit more. Home Performance Index is something that's specific to Ireland, and I'm not going to talk about it today, but I did just want to point it out as something for people involved in home building, that's something to look out for here in Ireland. And it's a performance index specifically for home builders in Ireland. It's similar to LEED, but more catered to home building. So, for example, Cherrywood is pursuing HPI for their new homes. LEED version 4.1 is the current version of LEED, and I just put that in there so that if you're hearing about LEED version 4, LEED version 3, 4.1 is kind of the current version. And there were a lot of buildings between 2011 and 2017, let's say, that were registered for LEED under version 3. And version 3 is phasing out, so any building that was registered under LEED version 3 has to be completed and certified by 2021. So we have like probably 20 LEED version 3 projects that are in construction right now, but they need to be completed by 2021. Otherwise, they have to upgrade to version 4 or 4.1. So just something to keep in mind if you're working on any active LEED projects, ask which version it's under. So with all these green building rating systems and certification schemes, they all have kind of the same common goals. And I think this is what the real key to this is, which is, and that space, that's One Windmill Lane, by the way. It's a Hibernia REIT project, and it's LEED Gold certified. But, you know, with everything we're looking at, optimizing energy performance, reducing greenhouse gases, we're looking at resilience and habitat preservation, as I spoke about before. Renewable energy, the reason that helps is it helps offset the peak demand on the grid also. So if you're generating renewable energy and giving that back to the grid, it helps with the peak demand of the whole country and reduces the need to build more fossil fuel power plants on the grid. So it's more than just creating the renewable energy for your own building, but supporting the whole infrastructure. And I believe Ireland is now working on a way that you can sell the power back to the grid. That's been an issue up till now, and it's the reason why you don't see more solar panels on buildings is for now the energy that you give back you're just kind of giving away. But they're going to implement a mechanism where you can actually get a credit on that and get paid for it. And then corporate social responsibility is a huge thing, especially now with a younger generation of people coming into the workforce. Millennials care about social responsibility and the environment, and believe it or not, they're choosing where they work based on companies that they support in terms of ethics and their concern for the environment and for their own welfare. Even as a small business owner, I only have a staff of 7, and I can tell you that everybody I've hired has asked about, health benefits, air quality, daylight. Our office when we first started was in a basement, and we moved up to a second floor because, we needed the daylight to keep our staff happy. So I feel it directly, and I think that in larger companies it's even more of an issue. And then thermal comfort, making sure people are comfortable in their workplace. It even deals with ergonomics, and you'd be surprised how much sitting in a desk for 8 hours a day affects your entire body, all of the systems in your body, mental health, physical health, everything. And then a big part of this too is it's all kind of coming together in GRESB, and you've already had a presentation on GRESB, so some of you might be familiar with it, but it's a global real estate sustainability benchmark. And this is what a lot of large organizations are doing, is they're starting to report on all of their buildings in terms of how they manage building certifications, but also social responsibility and their employees. And it helps them with their investors, because investors are looking at their GRESB score, and investors are choosing to invest in real estate investments that have high GRESB scores. So it does all kind of come back to money and investment. Now, I'm going to run through a bunch of slides about LEED and statistics, and I'm going to go through them fast because I have a feeling it's just kind of one simple message here, which is LEED is expanding very rapidly into the Irish market, specifically into the Irish market. So not just as LEED all over the world, but the U.S. Green Building Council and LEED, they track where are the biggest markets in terms of LEED. And obviously the U.S. and Canada is a big market, but what's interesting is you look at all these other countries in the world that are the top 10 countries in terms of LEED: Canada, Turkey, Germany, Mexico, China, Spain. It's funny that, to look at where the biggest adoption of LEED is, and often it comes from individuals and organizations that have kind of adopted LEED as a standard, and then they have a whole portfolio that they roll it out on. So where does Ireland fit into all of this? Interestingly enough, even though Ireland has only, at this time of this, it had 75 LEED certified projects. It's 15% when you weight it based on population. So it's, sorry, it's not 15%. It's the project count per million people. So there's 15 LEED certified projects per million people. That's because there's 5 million people. So I'm just getting the math in my head now. But what you see there is based on our population, we have a high percentage of LEED certified projects. So even though we're a small community, we have a large adoption of LEED as a standard. It's funny, the screen is kind of moving. So another way of looking at this is the number of LEED certifications in Ireland has increased by over 160% just in the past 2 years. And I think that's just because there's more building going up. Like in the last 2 years, there's a lot more building in general, but the new buildings that are going up are pursuing LEED. And so it's kind of interesting that while there was kind of this lull in the industry, people were trying to think, well, what, when we do start building again, what are we going to be doing? We're going to be building LEED gold and platinum buildings. And it kind of just happened overnight. And most projects in Ireland, again, this is just LEED stats right in Ireland. There's 4 certification levels in LEED: certified silver, gold, and platinum. Platinum's the highest. What's interesting is most projects, if they're going to pursue a LEED rating, go for gold, at least gold or platinum, because part of it has to do with our building regulations in Ireland are good enough that you're so close to achieving LEED gold just by meeting the standard of practice in Ireland. So, like, going back to what I was saying before about how LEED is the same all over the world, that's because LEED also applies to India and China and Taiwan and Africa. So the normal building practices in Africa may not be the same as what they are in Ireland. So in Ireland, our regulations are already at LEED gold, essentially. And most of the buildings in Ireland that are pursuing LEED are pursuing it as new buildings or new core and shell buildings. So that's BD and C is building, design, and construction. So all the new buildings you see going up are pursuing LEED. What I find interesting is there's very few fit-outs and very few existing buildings pursuing LEED. And this is where I think is the next big thing. So we're just now starting to see the first LEED fit-outs in buildings that we worked on a few years ago. So we worked on LEED core and shell buildings for developers, and now the tenants are coming in and they're asking for LEED for their fit-outs. So it's kind of the next phase. And then a few years from then, you'll start seeing LEED for existing buildings. We have one LEED for existing building project we're working on. It's 1 George's Quay. And 1 George's Quay is a LEED core and shell platinum building that we did a few years ago. And now they want to get into the cycle of maintaining their certification as an existing building. So this also ties into the climate action plan that was announced yesterday, which is we need to focus on retrofitting existing buildings. So the new buildings kind of have it figured out, they're in the right direction, but there are a lot of existing buildings that could be upgraded, and there's plenty of opportunity there. And fit-outs, people change leases, people have 5-year leases, 10-year leases. So we have to think about that as a recurring cycle, that every time there's a new fit out, we have to address sustainability again and again. It's not just the core and shell of the building. So again, here you just see the number of projects in Europe, really the focus is on the new builds. And where I'd like to see the focus is more on the fit outs and the existing buildings, because that's the big impact actually that we have. And then this is just to show you some examples of who is pursuing LEED in Ireland. I don't know if you guys can see that all the way in the back. You must have very good eyes, but you'll have these slides afterwards. But you can see there's a whole range of companies, pharmaceuticals, a lot of multinationals, medical device companies, tech companies, and a few. What's interesting is in Limerick, the city and county council of Limerick has adopted LEED for new buildings. So we're working with with Limerick on a few buildings down there that actually are government buildings, whereas we don't see a lot of government buildings here pursuing LEED. So there's different LEED rating systems for different building types. Like I mentioned, there's building design and construction as new buildings. There's even neighborhood development. So Cherrywood is the only LEED for neighborhood development scheme in Ireland. And now it's not certified yet, but it's pursuing LEED for neighborhood development. So it looks at LEED at a much bigger scale. And then there is LEED for homes, which has not taken off in Ireland. So HPI is kind of like the Irish version of LEED for homes. LEED for homes is big in the US and in China and countries that are doing like massive home building, but it hasn't really hit off here. Interior design and construction is fit outs again, and existing buildings is for recertification of existing buildings every few years. And this is the credit categories, which are pretty straightforward. You're basically looking at the energy use in the building, but also where the site is, and a lot of what, unfortunately, in the design and construction industry, we don't have a lot of influence in where buildings are being built. And so it's really the developers and the planners that need to be thinking about where are you building buildings? Are they located near transit? How are people going to commute to work? Are there residential areas nearby? Are there schools nearby, creches? At lunchtime, are there places for people to go to lunch? All of those things are built into the LEED rating system. So it's not just about energy performance and water performance, but about where the buildings are being built. And there are real savings. We've looked at just 5 of our projects that have achieved LEED certification, and we've gone back in and looked at utility bills and looked at waste tracking to see, what are the savings. And so this is money that's being saved every year. So every year, the landlord is saving this money. So, people often get held up overspending 20, 30,000 extra on their building to get a LEED Gold or Platinum rating, but then they're saving 200,000 a year. So, I kind of say, look, can we just stop having this discussion about is it worth the 20,000? It's worth it in the first year. So. And then the biggest focus in LEED is a weighted, there's a point system that I won't go into, but the most heavily weighted category, 35% of the weighting for LEED certification is about energy. So it really is the main focus. Everything from HVAC, lighting systems, equipment, like if you have a canteen, Energy Star appliances, even all the computers, laptops, printers, everything. And then commissioning, ensuring that the systems are running as designed. And this is one of the big values in LEED, is that one of the requirements to achieve a LEED rating is that you have to have an independent commissioning authority who witnesses the installation of equipment, the startup, the functional testing, because often people walk away from a building and the facility manager is left there. I have a project where the facilities manager is left with a BMS system that he doesn't know how to use. And the people who worked on the design and the installation of the BMS system no longer even work in Ireland. They've moved on. So, you have to make sure that there's the right training in place to use the building and to make the most of it. So just in terms of how LEED aligns with WELL, the Green Business Certification Institute manages both LEED and WELL. So LEED is more focused on the environmental impact of buildings, and LEED is more focused on the people, the occupants in the building, and the health of the occupants. And they're aligned so that there are credits in LEED and WELL that are directly related to each other. So if you achieve certain credits in LEED, you can pursue them in WELL. And so they've done that to make it streamlined and encourage people to do both. Now, again, look, when you had the WELL presentation earlier by Alan, he might have explained some of this, but somebody was saying to me recently that your facilities manager has more influence on your health than your own GP. So basically, I mean, your physical health is so much related to your work environment. from the chair you're sitting in right now to the air quality in here, the lighting, the access to daylight, the
Please don't be commenting on this.
I cannot help but be present in this space. But always think about the space you're in and how it impacts you. And, you know, if you ever feel like you need to get up from your desk and don't go down for a coffee break, it has nothing to do with the coffee. It's that you got to get up and move around. And our bodies are not meant to sit in one place for a long time. And your energy levels, your sleep patterns, like especially with the really dark winters here. I moved here from California, and I just really struggle in the winter because it's so dark. So we actually have these lights in our office that change from a warm light to a cool light at certain times of the day. We have them on timers, and it's supposed to actually help you sleep better now. I have 3 kids at home, so I don't sleep well at all anyway, but you know, there are things that we can be thinking about to help to make our workplace better for our overall environment. And, you know, it's also interesting that, especially in Ireland, the air quality outside is better than inside. So, you know, people are all worried about, there's kind of this interesting conflict because we talk about sealing our buildings, you know, sealing them so that they're airtight, but then you're actually sealing all the badness in. So we have to think about that, like we need something inside the building to make the air better because you're basically telling it can't get out, so it has to go somewhere. So, for example, I know we have a small office, but we have plants, and every time we hire a new employee, we get a new plant. And we say everybody gets a plant, that they produce oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. We have a CO2 monitor in our office, and whether there's 3 people in the office or 6, the CO2 monitor knows. Like when all of us are in the office, the CO2 monitor, an alarm goes off and we open the window because there's just not enough fresh air in the space. So, you know, you really got to think about these things, that the air quality is so important. And WELL is also all over the world, 51 countries. It's following LEED's footsteps. In fact, the guy who's the CEO of WELL used to be the CEO of LEED. So he's literally like bringing the WELL standard along the same path that LEED went on. And in Europe, you know, there's over 300 WELL projects. Now in Ireland, very few. So Arab's office in Cork, IPID's office in Dublin, we're working on a few, and actually one that just came out in the news last week. We haven't been able to talk about it till now, but you might be familiar with Iconic offices. They're like WeWork, co-working space. We're working on one of their new spaces on Richmond Street, the Lennox it's called, and it's going to be the first well-serviced office in Ireland. So, you know, again, that's like small businesses, incubators, bringing in entrepreneurs, and you've got this well workplace. So they're using that as a market differentiator to attract people, you know, because they're in direct competition with other serviced offices in Dublin. So what's on the horizon? Geez, how are we doing on time? Okay, that's good. I'm on the horizon slide. I'm only halfway through. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a picture of like where LEED is in the Irish market without getting into too much detail of the rating system itself, which can be pretty much checkbox, you know, energy, water, materials, you know, it's all, once you get going on a LEED project, you know, you manage the process, but what's so important is to not leave it behind. It's like you don't just get your plaque and walk away. This ARC platform is an online platform where you can manage your building and your portfolio. So let's say you have a client with 10 buildings and they have 2 new LEED buildings, but they also have 8 existing buildings and they want to retrofit their existing buildings. They can actually put all those buildings in this ARC platform to manage their portfolio and manage the real-time performance of the building. So it's not just based on your LEED documentation, but real-time data. And so it can connect to BMS systems, and there's, I think, Carbon Credentials. Was there someone from here? Carbon Credentials, we're working with them on the 1GQ project to do this, where they're basically looking at how to feed the BMS system into this portfolio management. So it's a real technical thing, and it's also creating jobs, technology jobs for people to figure out how to capture this data and use it for reporting in a way that it's useful. So what the ARC platform does is once your project is LEED certified, you're automatically in this ARC platform, so you can access it and you can feed information into it and monitor your performance in these different categories: energy, water, waste, transportation, human experience. So the human experience would be like doing post-occupancy surveys. Are people happy in the space? Some people don't like doing that. Like, they don't like asking people, are you comfortable? Because if they say no, you have to do something about it. So you almost have to be careful what you ask for. LEED for Cities was launched recently, and there's already over 100 cities in the world that are looking at LEED for Cities. There's only a few in Europe. And so this is kind of something, there's a little competition going on right now between Dublin, Cork, and Limerick as to which one of them will volunteer to be the first LEED for City in Ireland. So the LEED for Cities also feeds into this ARC platform. So if buildings that are certified are feeding data into the ARC platform, it helps with a LEED for City certification. So the whole city could become a LEED city with these buildings feeding into this platform. And LEED for Cities, and this is where we kind of step back into the bigger picture, because LEED for Cities starts aligning with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN has, a few years ago, came up with these Sustainable Development Goals that all UN countries have kind of committed to working towards these targets. And they don't just have to do with climate change and protecting our waters, but it has to do with population, no poverty, eliminating inequalities, social equity, providing housing for all, things like that. So this is about sustainability, not just on an environmental scale, but sustaining economic growth and human life on Earth, to be honest. So there are 129 cities and communities participating in the ARC platform, and which is kind of the first step in getting into the LEED for Cities program. So the city of Savona in Italy was the first LEED city in Europe, and that's we're trying to get more of them. Now, one of the other things on the horizon is well portfolio. So you can see these are all kind of getting bigger scale. LEED started with single buildings, neighborhood development, LEED for Cities. Well started with single buildings, now they're looking at well portfolio. So all of them are kind of scaling up so that development patterns can kind of think things through in a long-term way instead of just building by building. And then GRES, back to this, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. Portfolio managers, real estate investment trusts, investors, they're looking at GRES reporting. So we have quite a few clients in Ireland who are now in their second and third year of GRES reporting. Building certifications feed into that. So LEED certification, WELL certification, BREEAM, anything, any kind of third-party validated building certification helps with their overall GRES score. So that's the kind of direct connection there. And just to show how, everything's kind of moving in the same direction, in GRES, when it started out in 2010, there were a few projects, and this is the, let's see, is this oh, there we go. Here, that's the Europe one. So you can see that's the total number of participants in the GRES program in Europe. So it's growing quite fast. So as if we didn't talk about enough different rating systems, some of you are looking at me like I'm crazy, but Living Building Challenge. When I moved to Ireland, I came here to help spread awareness about the Living Building Challenge. And when I first presented this in 2011 at the Royal Institute of Architects, most of the comments were, are you kidding? Nobody's building anything right now. So I kind of walked away and said, okay, I'll come back to you in 7 or 8 years, right? And here we are now, and the Living Building Challenge, there are some clients in Ireland who are looking at the Living Building Challenge. And they're big clients, big organizations, multinational companies, and they are bringing the Living Building Challenge with them because they've done the Living Building Challenge in other parts of the world, and they're coming here and they're bringing the interest. So it's interesting that, these slides that I had in my pocket from 8 years ago are now back on the slideshow. I was afraid to show them for a long time. But basically what's happening here is, when we talk about LEED and green building and nearly zero energy building, we're talking about having less negative environmental impact. So we're talking about reducing the bad stuff that we're doing. Whereas with Living Building Challenge, it's looking at how can buildings have a positive impact on the environment? How can they give back? Like how can they produce more energy than they need? How can they filter the air so that the air inside the building is cleaner than outside the building? How can they generate more clean water, by filtering rainwater that's collected on the roof and turn it into potable water? So buildings can actually actively do something positive instead of just reducing the bad impact of buildings. So that's what living buildings are. And one of the pieces of the Living Building Challenge that is taking off the quickest is the idea of zero energy buildings. Not nearly zero energy buildings, zero energy buildings. So the idea with zero energy is that you're producing the energy you need on site. You're not using any fossil fuels. Zero carbon certification is basically carbon neutral buildings. I think the targets that were set out yesterday in the government announcement were getting to carbon neutral by 2050. So we're in 2019 already. So we have, 31 years to get there. So anyway, but this is the path that we're on. So all this stuff we've been talking about today is kind of in here, this kind of code compliance, that's part L, NZEB. Green is LEED and WELL, and high performance is kind of LEED Platinum, and then you've got truly sustainable is when you get to that 0 point, and then everything positive is beyond that. So, it's a conversation that has to keep going, and we're not at the end of the conversation quite yet. Now, if you're interested in hearing more about all the green building rating systems, Green Build is coming to Dublin next year in March. So Green Build is an international conference that started 20 years ago. And initially it was just a conference in the United States, and then they had an international one. Then they started creating ones in other parts of the world. So this is the third year there's a Green Build Europe. The first 2 years were in Berlin and Amsterdam, and now Dublin. So this is Dublin's chance to kind of say, this is Dublin, and this is what we're doing with green buildings. So if you're working on any green buildings and your companies you work for are interested, like Green Build's kind of a good place to showcase that. So hopefully we'll have a big Green Build party in Dublin in March. And that's it. This is our team. Martin Meehan, who's our chairman, he's been an architect in Dublin for 30 years. And when I moved to Ireland, I met him at the Royal Institute of Architects, actually, when I was giving the Living Building Challenge talk. And we started pursuing work together because I was working as an independent consultant. And then the LEED projects just kept coming. So we've built a team and created a company, Meehan Green. And, we're all LEED and WELL consultants, and we are the first LEED proven provider in Ireland. We just became a proven provider last week. So, there's only 7 in Europe. So we're just really glad we're at the front of this and want to keep pushing towards living buildings. Thank you.